Well, hello, folks. This is David T. for the Country Place. What a wonderful, wonderful day we have here in the greater Houston area. Joining us today is Jeff R. Now, folks, Jeff and I have known each other now for just a few days, and I wish to tell you that Jeff has got that walk with God that just lights up the room. And, folks, I know that he'll share that experience, strength and hope with you that'll light up your room also. Folks, here he is, Jeff R. The microphone's yours.
David, thank you so much. And yes, we've known each other for quite some time. I think about 13 years. I'm going to have sobriety coming up. It's been a great, great journey, and you've been an indispensable part of it. I remember in my first recovery meeting, second recovery meeting actually in Hockley, good country folk there. But I remember going to that meeting, and you were one of the old-timers, as they say, who shared their experience, strength, and hope. And early on, and still to today, your witness and your lived experience of what recovery should look like is indispensable to me. So I'm very appreciative of the invitation to appear on the show.
I know that in the beginning you had a lot of problems with your spiritual studies.
Absolutely.
Could you maybe start maybe as a young man on how you got involved in that kind of study?
Sure.
Tell us something about yourself.
Sure, no problem. I was born in Houston, native Houstonian to very good parents. Younger brother came along when I was 3 years old. And we went to church, Catholic church, every single Sunday. And loved the Mass. In the Catholic experience, the service is called the Mass. Loved that very much. And I would come home from church on Sundays, and I would dress up as a priest in our living room, and I would have Mass. And my appreciation of religion, specifically because it was my background, the Catholic religion, came from an appreciation of ritual. As I got into middle school and high school, that appreciation deepened to more of an intellectual appreciation of of Catholicism itself and the associated doctrines, the history, things along that line. By the time I got into college, I was seriously considering a vocation to the priesthood. I met with the priests at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston, and I inquired as to their seminary formation program. They accepted me into the seminary, and their first assignment to send me to was in Oakland, California, where for a year I taught high school as their seminarian, this group of priests called the Basilians, the Order of St. Basil. So I taught for a year and decided, I don't think I'm meant to be a priest far away from Houston. I like Houston. So I decided to come back home. And I studied at St. Mary's Seminary here in Houston for 8 years and was ordained a priest in May 2010. And that spiritual journey that accompanied that religious appreciation, and we learn in recovery that spirituality and religion are distinct, but my spirituality and the development of that I never understood as distinct from or different from my religious development, simply because the two were so enmeshed in my experience. I came into the priesthood and I immediately loved the ritual of it. I still do today, which we'll get to later on, presumably. But at the same time, I started noticing that there was an unhappiness, a restlessness in my heart for a closer relationship with God that was not just ritually based or intellectually based or based strictly on Catholicism. I was yearning to be in love with God, and I did not feel at the time a consistent expression of love from God. Although I know He was loving me, I just did not have the eyes to see that at the time. While I was a priest, I met who is now my wife. She was a parishioner there and at the church. And I left the priesthood and got dispensed from my vows that I took as a priest And it was around that time that, because of the crisis of leaving the priesthood, something that I've been preparing for my life, and the struggles going through that transition, that I gave myself over, sadly, to alcohol as a spirit. And I think it is significant, David, I think you've mentioned this in meetings before, I've heard it around, that it is not a coincidence that alcohol is called a spirit. Because for me, it did get me in touch with very, very dark, a dark life, a very, not only morally bankrupt life, but a spiritually sick life. And it was only when I came into AA in July of 2012 that I learned that I could have a love relationship with God, that God does not demand too hard terms for those who seek Him. AA taught me how to seek Him. And today, 13 or so years later, a little shy of 13 years, I have plugged back into the faith of my fathers, as they say in the big book of Catholicism, with a renewed love and an interest in it. That is not strictly intellectual, although it remains that. Is not strictly ritual, although it remains that. But more importantly, is grounded in a recognition of all that God has given me in my life, how He guides me on a daily basis, how He has kept me sober, how He has allowed others to be guides in my life, guideposts such as yourself that have been around and continue to show an example. So my relationship with God began as an appreciation of ritual, transitioned to the intellectual, atrophied at the time that I was drinking the most in my alcoholism, and through recovery and through my years in AA and through the example of people like yourself, has turned into a relationship of love and longing. My parents are both native Houstonians. They're still alive. They live out in Hempstead, Texas, which is what my dad affectionately calls Mayberry with an attitude. And he's retired. They're both retired. They were, as I said, native Houstonians. My dad worked for the light company in Houston, HL&P, back before it was deregulated, and retired as a senior vice president of NRG. And my mom, at various times, was a teacher, was a school assistant, and an unbelievably sturdy presence in our home. A lot of stories in AA feature parents or family upbringings that were rife with difficulty, conflict, things like that. I can say that my childhood was a good one in that regard, a very good one. There were the arguments, there were the conflicts that happened, but my parents were both very sturdy examples of what I understood to be at the time as a Christian, Catholic parents, husband, wife, people for my brother and I to look up to. One of the things I always enjoyed is we grew up next to my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, and we would always go over there. I would always go over to my grandpa's house. We called him Popel. And I would smoke cigars with him, which was when my nicotine habit began taking formation, which I still have today. But the childhood was very good. Went to public schools in Waller until middle school, when my parents moved me to Salem Lutheran School, which is in Rose Hill, rather, and had a very good schooling there. Then I went to Concordia Lutheran High School in Tomball, and graduated from there in 1998. Dated, did the usual things during that time. All the while in the back of my mind, thinking about the priesthood and thinking about a possible vocation in that regard. Went to Blinn College in Brenham for a year, and that was interesting, as my parents would say, using air quotes, emphatic air quotes. Got into a little bit of trouble there. Came back, went to the University of St. Thomas, got my undergraduate degree in political science, and then subsequent to that, as mentioned before, I went into the seminary, first out in California and then here at home. Childhood was very good. It was very peaceful. We grew up in Waller, Texas. And it was just a very, very peaceful childhood. And as I said before, a lot of the issues that we hear about parental upbringing and things like that factoring in very legitimately in a lot of our brothers and sisters' experience. That to me was something that those struggles I didn't experience growing up. It was a stable family. But it was the subsequent choices that I made in response to events, in response to my own insecurity, in response to life, that really started to create a divergence in my own mind and heart between the love of God and the judgment of God. I've spoken of before, too, that when I came into AA, if I could summarize my relationship with God as succinctly as I could, it would be that God was apathetic or angry. He was never loving. He either didn't care, or if he did care, he was very much not happy with me. I learned and have been learning throughout my time in recovery that God is bigger than my problems. He is bigger than my selfishness. He is bigger than any struggles that I may have in my life. And that my task is to seek him. And when I seek him, and I often do not, but when I do seek him, he shows up and he shows off.
Your drinking career, I mean, here it seems that you were following that religious, spiritual path, but something happened. What happened?
To this day, I can't diagram it, write it out, make complete sense of it in a rational way. But one of the things that I was not dealing with, and this has come out in working through the steps with my sponsor and discussions with others, that I was not acknowledging that a part of me was fundamentally broken. That I did not realize that God was always there inviting me to a relationship of love with him. As I've said before, I viewed him as either absent and apathetic, or when he was present, as being very angry. My drinking, there's a very interesting family home video from the Christmas of 1999. And my parents would always let me drink a little bit at my grandparents' house on Christmas Eve. And I had one too many or two too many. I don't remember the exact quantity, but it was enough that I was very much inebriated and made a fool of myself. I mean, I won't go into details, but there was an African rain stick and a yarmulke involved. I have no idea. But the next day, I remember the shame that I felt. Not only the thickness of the hangover and the headache that was associated with that, but the embarrassment that I caused myself and my parents and my brother and my grandparents and others who were there. And periodically, from that point, around the late 90s, late high school, all the way through when I came in here in July of 2012, there were binges that I engaged in when things would get difficult, or whenever I didn't want to deal with feelings, or whenever I wanted to escape from the present. There was always an escape hatch that alcohol provided me with, I thought at the time. It, as we hear a lot, right? It began as a servant, but quickly became the master. That whenever things would go wrong, be it in the seminary, be it in the ministry itself, be it professionally before entering into the seminary, with relationships, whatever, alcohol was the tonic that I would use to escape from the negative feelings, the heartache, the mental anguish, spiritual anguish, whatever it may have been. Alcohol was what I used to deal with it, so to speak, to escape from that pain. It was only when I began my relationship with my wife, in the context of still being a priest, that disjunction, that pain of, I've prepared all my life for this ministry, but yet I cannot be with this person if I remain in the ministry, where that crisis of identity became very acute, and I was forced to make a decision. Did my drinking take off and became very much out of control and on a daily basis. And that lasted, I would say, from March of 2010 to July of 2012. After I left the ministry, my wife heroically stuck by me. I had some time off for bad behavior, as it were, for about a year, and then we got back together a little bit, and then again we had more time away from each other. But I went back to live with my parents as a 29, 30-year-old man after having left the priesthood. That was incredibly painful. One of the most painful and most acute memories that I have of that time was going outside when my parents were having furniture delivered for my dad's upstairs stereo room. And I came outside and my dad was talking to the person who was delivering the furniture, and the individual said, "Well, how is Jeff doing? I heard he's no longer in the priesthood." And my dad, without shaming me or anything, the look on his face was, well, he decided that it really wasn't for him. And I could just tell by his face that shame that was there, that disappointment that was there. And I used that as an excuse to go further into the bottle and to check out from reality. There was one occasion where I went to see my now wife, and I'm deliberately not using her name because it's right. But I went to go visit her, and I left some empty bottles of wine on the back porch of my parents' home, and they came home and discovered that. I got a call, and my mom was very upset, as was my dad, and they said I needed to do something with my life. Something needed to change quick, so they advised that I go to AA. Well, this is back in 2011, and I wasn't ready yet. I hadn't hit the bottom that I thought I needed to hit, I guess. But I went to one meeting, and it wasn't a newcomers meeting or anything because I didn't introduce myself as such. And didn't really take, so to speak, because I didn't give myself to it. The drinking continued until July of 2012, when my parents called me one day. At the time, I was working at the outlet mall in Cyprus. You probably remember in early sobriety, I was still doing that. And my mom called and said, "We need to come visit you at your apartment. We have something to talk to you about." And I remember thinking, well, this is odd. What is this about? So they show up. And my parents said to me that they were thinking about getting a divorce. Well, as I mentioned before, that was unheard of from my experience with them growing up. From the Catholic Church also. You're very right. I was shocked. And I just stood there in my kitchen. I'll never forget where I was, by the island in my kitchen there in that apartment. And they let me sit in that, or stand in that, as the case may have been, for a good minute and a half. Seems longer, could have been longer. And either my mom or dad said, "How you feel right now is just a fraction of how we feel knowing that you are killing yourself with alcohol." And that stopped me dead in my tracks, David. That night, I went to what I always considered to be my first real AA meeting, because I wasn't inebriated there like I was in the first one that I mentioned a moment ago, in Fairfield, Texas, at a church there in Fairfield, Texas. Again, I didn't introduce myself as a newcomer. To this day, I haven't had a newcomer meeting. But it was a very good experience for me. I met my parents for dinner afterwards. We talked about it, and that was the first meeting that I went to, and I did the 90 meetings in 90 days, which is a suggestion, a very good one that comes from recovery centers, but has been imported into a lot of AA parlance. And I did that, and I've been sober since that time by the grace of God. And I have noticed too, and this is something that's said a lot in the rooms, that this disease is doing push-ups, and that this disease is progressive. Undoubtedly true. But I think one thing that should be mentioned more often is that recovery is progressive too. You know, people will say sometimes that my natural state is to be in a bar right now. Well, it's not anymore. At 13 years, it better not be. If I'm working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, my natural state is to be doing this podcast with you right now. It's to go home to my family when we're done here that's my natural state, is to be in a meeting 3 nights a week. At this point, it's what my cadence is. That is what my natural state is. And if I could describe God in any way, kind of circling back to the question that you started with, he is a higher power for me that renovates my character and changes my nature for the better when I let him. That's how I would describe that. But in terms of the drinking, episodically, it was very bad, with specific episodes of emotional, spiritual, or mental turmoil, up until 2010, when the personal crisis manifested itself, or I brought it on myself to be more accurate. Then I began using alcohol as a daily escape, and I soon could not do without it.
And you're the type of drink, I know it's all, we all have our drink.
Sure.
But I understand that you love the wine. Is that correct?
I am ashamed to say, for more reasons than one, that I was a Franzia, a patron of the fine wine of Franzia, those fine grapes from some basement in Dallas or whatever. But yes, it was wine, and then as it got progressively worse, I would go and vodka was my choice of drink. And it would be beer. It was never beer because it would never work fast enough. I would always feel too bloated. And so being the health conscious, alcoholic that I was, I went with the wine and the vodka, and those became my choices. And the worst it ever got was probably 2 months before I got sober, where I'd lost an entire weekend of memories. I don't know what happened. And I woke up, I still have a scar on my forehead from falling into something in my apartment. I don't know when or how that happened. But I'm glad that God worked through my parents with that intervention, and that God continues to work through you and people like you in the rooms of AA to sustain me and to continue to renovate my understanding of who God is and make my nature such that it is a natural thing for me to do today, to be engaged in the work of recovery when I suit up and show up, which again, as I said, doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's beautiful.
That's so, I suppose that's one thing that has so much impressed me with you, is that commitment that you have to God, that started as a young man up to your adulthood, into the priesthood, and finding that you needed a deeper walk with God. And here, to me, the miracle is how God even used alcoholism to get you close to him.
Yes, David. And the most crystal clear example of that is my 6-year-old son and my 21-year-old stepdaughter. My wife came into my life at a point where I was at my lowest. Didn't give up on me. And she invited her daughter, she's a widow, so her daughter at the time was 7 years old, and made me a part of their life. Through many difficult years and difficult circumstances, I was able to successfully propose marriage to her. And she said yes, a little over 7 or 8 years ago. I better remember before the next anniversary comes around. And she said yes, and we together have a 6-year-old boy who I know you've met.
I would love to hear about the time when you shared that you were going to be a dad.
Oh, David, it's one of our deceased members came up to me whenever I made that announcement in the context of a share at AA, and this person came up to me afterwards and said, "Well, I don't think you ever thought about that as being part of your life story, given the fact that I was a priest and all of that." And I said, "Absolutely, I didn't, but I'm so glad it is." Looking into his eyes and bringing him to some open meetings with me, and seeing how my stepdaughter is going through struggles right now in various ways, but is advancing in her academic career and preparing for great things in her life. Having a home that I go to and having a wife there that loves me and is patient with me when I'm a dry drunk, which does happen with more frequency than I'd like to admit sometimes. Those blessings is those blessings comprise the gift that I've been talking about, that God has given me the ability to be a dad, the ability to be a husband. My son has never seen me take a drink in his life. And God willing, and he does, I will never take a drink again. The other day, we were on the way home from an open meeting, and prior to Friday, which was when this past Friday, I had always told him truthfully that one of the reasons why I was going to AA, to make me a better daddy and a better husband. Very true. As you and I both know, it's much more than not merely to minimize, but merely in terms of content. It's much more than the first step. It's about living. It's about taking that 12th step and practicing these principles in all of my affairs, in my home, in my work, etc. He asked me point blank, Daddy, what really is an alcoholic? And I told him. And I told him that Daddy used to be very sick. I used to drink poison, which for me it's poison. It's alcohol. It's not poison for everybody, but it was poison for me. It is poison for me. And I got really sick until somebody recommended that I go to AA. I think I told them my parents, actually. Didn't give them the whole backstory because that would have really freaked them out. But I told him that my parents, his Nana and Mo, ran an intervention on me that brought me to my first meeting, and that's why I go 3 nights a week, and that's why Daddy's not home. So it's been very interesting because it's not easy on my wife to be at home 3 nights a week, sometimes 4, with me gone for a long period of time. With him being 6, he's got soccer, all these great experiences that he's going through. But she understands the need for it, for me to go. Not only for myself, but for the family and the well-being of the family. And I'm very grateful that AA gives me a place where I can, with confidence, tell my son, this is why I need to go and this is why I go. And now, tonight, for example, before I left to the meeting, he's like, Daddy, I know you need to go. I'm proud of you. I'm 6 years old, you know? So there's always been that delicate balance in my mind and the mind of my wife of how much do we want to developmentally tell him or whatever. But I called her when he asked me that question and said, okay, I'm going to launch into this. I just want to, get you on, make sure you're on the same page. And she was. And I told him. And my stepdaughter knows that I go to AA, and she knows why. She gave me my chip 1 year. I think it was my 9-year chip or something like that. And they're very supportive. Couldn't be more supportive. So that's another way that God's manifested himself in my life.
All the way from a young man studying for ministry all the way to a dad,
right,
with a family of 2 children.
Right.
It's a long walk, isn't it, Jeff? It
is, David. A beautiful one.
If there was any other experience that you could tell a person out there who's listening to this something of experience, strength, and hope,
sure,
what would you tell that person?
Stay the course. There's a reason why in our home group we have a sign over both of our main doors that says, keep coming back. Stay the course. I did not come into AA with a pure motive. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's something that we hear sometimes saying that if you're not here for you, you're not going to stay. In my own experience, I came here because I scared the hell out of my parents. And I was concerned because of their concern. And if I could identify the motive, the main overriding motive that I was aware of going to my first meeting, it was to allay their fear. And then I got a sponsor. You and I both know who my first sponsor was. A great guy. And he suggested to me strongly, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I did. By the time that 90 days was over, I don't know precisely what day of the 90 it was, but by the time that period of time was over, I wanted to keep coming back, and I knew that this was going to change my life. Those early weeks, those early days, for those of you listening who are in that particular time period, those are tough. There's a reason why in AA we give each other chips and we give each other rounds of of applause when we reach what to the outside world may seem to be minor milestones. When it was a month and I had not taken a drink, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to my brother and sister alcoholics. It's a big deal in here. It's huge. 2 months, 3 months. There's a reason why these chips are on a monthly cadence until you get to a year. Because each month, each day, each night, sometimes each minute is incredibly difficult. We understand that. We get that. Keep coming back. Keep coming back. I would also say, people in the outside world that are not in recovery, through no fault of their own, and because they are not afflicted with the disease of alcoholism, many times don't understand the degree of effort and the degree of transformation that we go through when we first get into programs of recovery. About 2 weeks sober, which in an alcoholic's life is a couple years, I got a call from my mom. I had been working, I was still at the time, as I mentioned, working at the outlet mall up in Cypress. And I got a call, and I had slept in because I didn't have to work the morning shift. So I slept until about 10 o'clock. I stayed up late at night, not doing anything bad. I was just up late, and I slept late. So my mom called me, and I answered groggily because I had just been awakened. And she's like, "What happened? What happened? What'd you do last night? Why are you sound that way? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Why you sound that way?" She immediately suspected that I had drank. And I got on my high horse and I said, "I have not drank in 2 weeks. No, of course not." "Well, why do you say that?" And I got all mad at her. And I told my sponsor this. He's like, "Well, who can blame her? It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks. In the outside world, it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday night, I was arriving home from an AA meeting from the time of this recording. 2 weeks is 2 weeks. But for somebody newly in recovery, that's a long time. But I come to AA to get that affirmation. It is not, for me, fair for me to expect these accolades from other people. I always give the example. A police officer has never pulled me over, asked me to roll down the window, license and registration, and then followed that up with, "I just wanted to thank you for driving the speed limit today. Have a good one." That's never happened. Nobody has ever out there thanked me for not drinking. They could care less. Not because they're malicious, but because why should they? I'm the one with the problem. And it's within the rooms of AA that we get that friendship. And though the 12 steps, that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Those 12 steps. To get into those, to work those steps. The fellowship, for lack of a better term, though, for me, was and is the gateway drug to the steps, because it is through the friendships, the camaraderie that the Big Book talks about, survivors of a shipwreck, etc. That has been and continues to be the nest into which this whole recovery experience is situated. The friendship, the love, the support in here. So if you're new, a very long-winded answer to a very good question. If you're new, keep coming back. Don't give up until the miracle happens. These are cliches, but cliches exist for a reason, because they are true.
Folks, how about a nice hand for Jeff? Thank you so much for being a part of the Country Place today, Jeff. That's for you. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, they love you, Jeff. Oh, well, folks, this is David T. from the Country Place and Jeff R. wishing you a very happy and joyous day. Until we meet next time, God bless and bye-bye for now.